Disclaimer: this video is of humorous nature only. The author does not seek to insult or humiliate anyone. The video may contain profanity. People under the age of 16 should refrain from watching this video. Story 1. Watch: the CEO of a company worked at start screaming and stomping his feet because people weren't listening to his band at a company event, and instead were mingling at the bar. He literally shouted, "This is my party. This is my company. This is my favorite band." I just started laughing. What else can you do? Story 2. In my youth, I worked in a little gift shop. A well-dressed, elegant couple in their 40s came into the shop one day during the Christmas season with an ad in hand for a certain item. We had sold out of the item, and they yelled at me demanding I order a new one for them, or it was false advertising. I was timid back then, so I just quietly explained that it was a limited lot, which was stated in the ad, and we couldn't order any more. This enraged the woman. She actually stamped her foot and said we had ruined her Christmas. Up to that point, I was annoyed and a little scared of their over-the-top anger. But when she stamped her foot, I burst out laughing. Seeing a grown woman do that was just so absurd, especially when the item in question was an angel figurine on sale for $5.99. Story 3. Dude at Walmart in 2003-ish had a complete meltdown over his spiral notebooks ringing up at 30 cents a piece instead of the 25 cents that was listed on the sign. Composition notebooks were 25 cents. Someone put those spirals back on the shelf in the wrong spot. He did the whole shebang. Even shouted, "You don't know who you're dealing with," while his teenage daughter begged him to stop. The cashier started crying. First time I've ever seen someone trashy enough to get thrown out of a Walmart. Story 4. Not necessarily public, but used to work at an oncology office. Someone wanted to reschedule their app the day before they were supposed to come in. No big deal. I tell him when I have available, and none of the times worked for him. He became irate and told me, I need to be nicer to him because he has cancer. Like, sir, I sympathize, but everyone here has cancer. Story 5. On my first cruise, my 11-year-old son and I rounded a corner, and there were two old ladies, one standing in the stairwell and another halfway up the staircase, screaming. The two white-haired ladies were hollering things like, "I hate you," and "I wish I'd never taken you on this trip," and so on. My son's eyes were as wide as saucers. Apparently, any sort of tizzy that I had gotten into in his presence was far eclipsed by the performance given by these two elderly gals. Story 6. 2 weeks ago in Orlando, my family and I were in a nice restaurant. There was an issue a few tables away from us. It was a group of guys in their late 20s. Guessing, it started over slow service, and the waiter, manager, and a food runner ended up in a confrontation with the 4 patrons. Lots of yelling and drama. The guys got escorted out, and it should have been over right there, but one of the guys came back in and hit the waiter in the back of the head, sucker punch from behind, and was tackled by the busboy. 2 of the other guys from the table come running back in, don't know what happened to the 4th, and jump into it. Cooks came out of the back, and 6 restaurant workers took down the patrons. Ended with police being called and arrests being made. It was the biggest brawl I've seen in a while before the cops got there. There may have been alcohol involved. Story 7. I had just walked up to my parked car with my family from the beach in South Florida. It was a packed and busy parking lot. An older, retired-aged lady flew around the corner and pulled up directly behind us and asked if we were leaving. I told her that we were. We proceeded to open the trunk to put our beach stuff in. We were still wet from swimming and were drying our clothes off with towels, clapping the sand out of our shoes, etc. The lady was still parked directly behind us, watching us like a hawk. It had been maybe 3 minutes since we had got to our car. She then asked if we were almost done, and I calmly replied that it would just be a minute. We got into our car, fired up Google Maps, and she started laying on her horn yelling at us to ducking move. I put the car in reverse and asked her to get out of the way, as she was blocking us in. She got out of her car and came right up to my window, yelling and screaming profanities at us like we had violated her rights. No shame, yelling in front of several people like a nutcase. People in FL are ducking insane, especially the retirees. They are nasty, rude, and entitled. It is not just the retirees. Road rage down there is so common, and people fly off the handle for the smallest things. I think the heat gets to people, IDK, but the nastiest and worst people I have ever met live there. They are like ticking time bombs. I wish I had recorded this. It would have been an instant viral Karen video. Story 8. Worked at a bingo hall for 4 years. We sold paper games as well as an electronic computer that played for you. Each computer was $30 for the night. For holidays, the jackpots for each round usually double, if not triple. So the place was usually packed, so much that it occasionally became standing room only, and people would literally stand along the walls. Unfortunately, we had 200 computers with a max building capacity of 700, so if you didn't get in line early, they sold out fast. So I often had to tell people that they weren't going to get a computer for the night. This one night, it was December 22nd or 23rd, and it was her birthday. She set aside the money for a computer, but we had sold out almost an hour prior. Her group showed up after gameplay had started. All the tables and chairs were taken, so her group had to stand. She was upset that concessions refused to give her food for free. They never gave food away for free. So what did this 20-something do? In the middle of a game, she threw her food on the cashier, drink and all, ran up to a table of customers nearby, taking things off the tables and throwing them around, picking up drinks and throwing them at others, snatching up 2 computers and yelling, "It's my birthday!" But eventually, a few former military dudes and her brother stopped her. She was arrested and charged with a few crimes. Most people she hit with food press charges, along with the owner who pressed charges for damaging several computers because they got soda dumped on them and stopped working. I was not interviewed as a witness. They had plenty and security footage. Games continued after a 45-minute delay. I get that people want to feel special and for things to go perfect on their birthday. But Duck, Story 9, was working in a coffee shop when I was 15. A man came in, ordered a coffee and a donut, and handed me an American bill. On our cash register was a button for American cash so that it had up to the minute conversion to ensure we gave the right amount back. I handed him his change and his order and he refused. He told me I didn't give him the correct change back and demanded my manager. My manager heard the story, ran it through again, and proved it was correct by pulling up the current exchange rate on her phone. She backed me up and told him I was right, he was wrong. The guy lost it. He threw his change at us and stormed out of the shop. We were lost for words. Not only did he pay for the order, but he left it on the counter when he stormed out, and then also gave us the change by throwing it at us and leaving. So what did he accomplish? Story 10. Christian youth pastor at a chain restaurant where I worked. Brought in 9 teenagers on New Year's Day after a lock-in at their church. We were the only restaurant in town open at 6 a.m. on New Year's Day, and 3 people called out sick, hungover. So we literally had 1 cook, 1 waitress, me, and 1 shift supervisor for about 60 people seated, and a line out the door. He threw a hissy fit when I offered coffee, and he told me they were teens and caffeine was bad anyhow. Then proceeded to order everyone Cokes. We were already running out of food. 2 other restaurants in town weren't open that we'd expected to be open, and our general manager sucked at inventory. Half the food they ordered, things like Eggs Benedict, wasn't available. The guy was a total ass to me. I hustled and kept their Cokes refilled, got pancakes, eggs, bacon, sausage orders out fast, and the kids were rowdy and wired but generally well-behaved. He tried to dine and dash. I stopped him and he started yelling at me in front of 75-plus people, saying my customer service was so poor we didn't deserve to be paid, that he'd complained to corporate, etc. My shift supervisor cut him off and recognized him, told him Jesus didn't like cheats. The youth pastor screamed at him and called me a useless lesbian call girl. I had short hair. I got 0 tip, a bunch of chick tracts, and 2 kids turned their waters upside down and stuck the half-full glasses to the table so it made a mess when I moved them. Such good Christians. Story 11. Dude missed a flight on the Big Yellow Banana. Entirely his own fault. When informed that they could not accommodate him until the next day, he became enraged. Yelling, screaming, stomping his feet. He actually knocked the computers off the neighboring desk. He hit one of the employees and then had the audacity to try to fly the next day. No, sir, you're not flying ever again. Attacking an airport employee will get you added to the no-fly list. Story 12. I watched a 70-some-odd-year-old Asian lady have a complete meltdown because a restaurant was out of donut holes. She was lying on the floor screaming and grabbed the restaurant's credit card machine and refused to give it back until she got her donut holes. Cops were called. Then she claimed she was having a heart attack, so EMS was called. And that's where I came into it. Story 13. I used to work as a loan officer in a credit union. I had a member who was applying for a pretty sizable loan. In the past, we had accepted income as stated. However, his credit had taken a hit, and he no longer qualified for his income verification to be waived. He brought in a piece of scratch paper where he had handwritten his income sources and their totals. I advised, this was a good start, but we'll need his tax return so we can confirm those figures. He became livid, cussed me out, and stated we will accept this as his income or else he will close all of his accounts. I countered that we will not accept this due ejaculate or cum, sementation, and that he cannot close his accounts until he either pays off the $100K he already owes us or finds another lender to take on that debt, which may be difficult as his current creditworthiness will almost certainly require his income be verified through the normal means. He raged his way out of the branch and only came back a month later because every other financial institute he had applied to had outright denied him. He would tell the tellers that he was going to knock my ducking head off. I would make a point to friendly wave and greet him by name when he came in. He wasn't carrying a lot of liquid assets, but he owned a good amount of property and other assets. It would have been so awesome if he had assaulted me in public. He was a bear of a man, and I likely would have had the crap beaten out of me, but it would have been such a slam-dunk lawsuit against him and my employer. For a good minute, I was making plans for what I was going to do with his property after his and my employer's checks were cut. But alas, he was moderately hinged and never did end up assaulting me. Ducking lame. Story 14. I actually witnessed a real adult tantrum. My manager had to fire an employee for excessive tardies, absenteeism, and constantly being short in his cash drawer. It was a financial institution and he was a teller, so that was a major problem. She took him in her office but was concerned about his reaction because he was quite a drama king and outweighed us by about 200 pounds, so she left her office door open just in case. I asked the security guard to stand near my desk, which was right outside of the office. As she broke the news, he started yelling, "No, no, no." Then he picked up a pair of scissors and held them over his head in a threatening manner while she tried to calm him down. He put the scissors down and ran out of the office and out next to my desk in a little open area. He proceeded to throw off his blazer and rip his shirt open, buttons popping off and flying everywhere. He then ran up the stairs to the mezzanine, laid down on the floor on his stomach and literally kicked his feet and pounded the floor with his fists like a baby having a tantrum in a cartoon. The building shook. Thankfully, we were closed, so no customers were there. Eventually, he calmed down. The security guard and another teller who was going to the police academy managed to help him collect himself, and then he went down the teller line, saying goodbye to each employee while the guard was redirecting him away. They were all freaked out. The employee, who was a future cop, drove him home. It was scary and appalling. 2 days later, he came back to apologize to the manager, say goodbye to me, ask the manager if he could still come to the Christmas party, and ask me for the buttons from his shirt. I really hope he got his crap together eventually. Edit. Typos. Story 15. I dug up a comment I made to this same question 2 years ago. A sales guy I worked with just earned a huge commission on a multi-million-dollar mortgage. Some of us convinced him he should take us out to dinner because we helped, and he was a good sport. And we, sales guy and 3 low-wage earning women from support staff, went out to a local pub. The bank president was there, which was not unusual. He made the rounds of all the local places most nights after work. He came over to say hello, and when he found out why we were there, he got angry that he hadn't been invited and started yelling at us and banging his fists on the table. Then he went back to his friends at the bar. We decided he had to be joking. There was no way he could be angry at us for that, so we decided we'd be funny too. We asked the server if she would bring him the check, but don't really leave it with him, and she thought it was funny too, so she did. He was not kidding. I've never seen a grown man have such a public tantrum in my life. He was screaming at us until we got up and left, and would not let us take the check back. I went to work the next morning, and my boss, who was supposed to be with us but had something come up, was coming out of the president's office, and this guy, who did not swear in front of women, wanted to know WTF we did to make his boss so mad that he was trying to order my boss to fire the guy that got the commission. Later on, we figured it out. Because of that commission, the sales guy earned more money that year than the bank president. Story 16. Semi-regular customer gets assistance from a coworker who had just started that week. Usually this guy loves to talk about how he breeds Rottweilers back in Cuba. He'll talk your ear off, and usually I just smile and nod while trying to recommend him the supplies he was actually here for. Well, for this particular night, he decided to somehow pivot the usual convo about his Cuban Rotties into how he thinks kids in Cuba are more mature than the U.S., we're in the U.S., and started to tell this poor new coworker about how he thought it was bullcrap that an adult got arrested for statutory with a 16-year-old. I, while scanning someone else's items at the register, had to quickly, calmly, but firmly interrupt him with a simple, "Sir, this is not the time and place for this conversation." He then goes on about how he thought America was all about free speech and starts ranting and raving with no further provocation from anyone else. The manager came in and sadly started ringing him up himself rather than kick him out. But even other customers were shocked while he was still ranting and raving about how he wished this whole country would blow up. Thankfully, I never saw him again, but I also never saw that coworker after that week. Can't say I blame her. Story 17. At Orange County K. John Wayne Airport, a grad school friend I was traveling with actually laid down on her soft luggage on the floor, screamed and wailed like a toddler because she missed her flight. I have never seen such a spectacle. The airline desk workers were alarmed and came over to reassure her there were other flights they could put her on later. She was in her 30s. As a former retail manager, I've seen a lot. The most ridiculous one was when I got called to the register because a woman thought the sales tax was a penny more than it should have been. She bought a $3 scarf that was half price, so it was $150. With tax, it was $154. Tax is 6.35%, and she thought it should be $153. Math isn't my strongest suit, but I told her that the 35% probably pushed it over an extra penny. She kept arguing to the point where she had tears in her eyes and refused to leave. I finally told her that I would give her a penny, and she said no, paid, and left. Story 19. A weekly market going, as it has been for the previous 2 or 3 months, an all-summer thing. Dude, I guess, has enough of it and decides to scream at everyone out his window that he's going to get his gun and shoot everyone up, then disappears. Well, someone called the cops. We got evacuated, and he got arrested. I can't remember if he actually even owned a gun, but turns out the guy was all bark and no bite anyway. Story 20. I used to work at a Crumble Cookies in a very wealthy, very touristy neighborhood. This grown-ass woman, in her mid-40s at least, had placed a carry-out order on the app. She was about 20 minutes late to pick up her order, and by that time we had gotten so wildly busy that in order to keep up with the rest of the orders, we'd had to use some of the cookies from her order to fill the ones who were actually there and on time or early for their pickups and deliveries. She was actually out in the street in her huge luxury SUV and called us saying, "Hey, there's nowhere to park, so I'm out in the road with my hazards on. Just bring them out to me." Which is a major no-no. We are not allowed to deliver across the street or to the street. She had to either park or come inside, Not sure if that was a law or just company policy. And when I informed her that her order would need about 5 more minutes, she absolutely lost her mind. I'm talking screaming into the phone so loudly that it just clipped and garbled everything she was saying. I kept hearing the phrase, "terrible customer service," and "I'm not moving," over and over again. I kept trying to tell her that hers was the next order in line, and we'd have it out as fast as possible, but she kept cutting me off to shriek more. Eventually, the line of cars in the road that she was blocking was honking at her enough that she hung up, swerved into our parking lot, put her hazards on in the middle of one of the lanes, where she was blocking some people who were trying to leave, and then called again to resume her banshee wailing at me. But by that time, we had it ready. So I told her I'd be out in a second, and she just hung up after I said that. When I finally brought them out, she didn't say a word, just frowned at me and put them in her car. I'm not usually confrontational, but I couldn't resist throwing in an over-the-top, cheerful, "Thank you for your patience, ma'am," to which she responded by giving me a look that looked like she was trying to figure out how to blast me away with Cyclops eye lasers. When she couldn't do that, she just angrily said, "Bye," and finally left. Story 21. My MILF threw herself on the ground and cried because I wouldn't let her friend use my company's Gulfstream to fly her to Europe for her birthday. I told her she was more than welcome to charter it at my discount if she liked. When I told her the company would need a $90K deposit, is when she fell to the ground in tears. Story 22. As law enforcement, I've seen countless tantrums from grown adults. I think the worst, dumbest was a guy who booked and checked into a hotel room late at night after partying and lost his crap when he was made to check out at 11. He was adamant because the date he checked in was that day that he was entitled to stay until the next calendar. Date's checkout time. Basically, in his mind, hustling an extra night stay for the price of a single night. We spent like a good 45 minutes explaining why he was wrong and that he had to leave because staff said GTFO. He got so mad he called his mom to co-sign his silly strategy because "you officers aren't experienced travelers like myself," says guy staying at a hooker hangout by the PJs. And even she told him he was wrong and sounding really stupid. He basically tantrumed so hard I had to start physically removing him from the lobby, and he flipped out, creating an arrest situation for himself. All he had to do was leave. I was still going to just psych-eval him, but the supervisor wouldn't stand for his nonsense and ordered him arrested. Story 23. We had a regular customer at the drive-thru of the McDonald's I worked at during uni, and we all couldn't stand her. She had a serious case of resting bitch face, along with all the resting bitch talk and resting bitch attitude to go with it. She was just a deeply unpleasant woman, and I hated serving her. Let's calling her RBF. Anywho, it's a Saturday lunch rush and we are flat off our feet. It's super duper busy, not just in the drive-thru but at the front counter too. It doesn't help that we have a longer than usual drive-thru, so the cars are really built up. I'm order taker for drive-thru this shift and take an order, and sure enough, it's RBF. She barks into the speaker that she's been waiting forever to place her order and she wants a medium Diet Coke. That's it. And can we hurry, please? I'm late for work. She finally gets around to the window, angrily shoves some coins into my hand, and shouts at me that we're all incompetent and it shouldn't take this long to get a drink. And she may lose her job now. When she finally gets to the collection window to get a drink, rather than take it and drive off, she instead pours out the drink in front of our 15-year-old runner, screaming that we've cost her job because it took forever, and there is no point in having it now, because her shift at work has already started, and now she's probably fired, and it's all our fault. She then gets out of her car and bangs on the window counter that if she ever sees any of us come into her place of work, she will make it her personal mission to be as slow as possible to serve us as payback, to see how we like it. She then gets back in her car and angrily starts honking her car horn and aggressively inching her car closer and closer to the one in front, who also can't move because some dickhead in of them decided that parking their car at the end of the drive-thru was the best place to clean it out and empty all the rubbish. The kicker is she worked at the supermarket another 2-minute drive directly down the main road. If she really wanted a freaking Diet Coke so badly, She could have skipped all that time in the drive-thru, go directly to work, buy a bottle before her shift started, and be on time. Instead, she spent 20 minutes having a temper tantrum. Story 24. I worked at a movie store as a teenager. A guy pulled up at 10:15 p.m. We closed at 10 raw. He saw me in the dark store and tapped on the window to indicate he was returning his movies. I looked at him and tapped on my wrist to indicate they were already late. He proceeded to throw all 3 movies at the window as hard as he could and started cursing at me. After he drove off, I went outside and wrote down all the barcodes. I looked up his account and added a note as to what happened. I left the movies sitting outside. Obviously, all the movies were stolen. He had to pay the capped late fee, plus he had to pay for replacements. Funny thing is, had he just accepted they were late and dropped them in the bin, I would normally do people a solid and check them in before I finished closing. His childish behavior cost him a lot more money, around $100, in the long run. Story 25. At an old job working at what was effectively a gas station connected to a certain popular retail chain. A customer who frankly was speaking very quietly did a very poor job of explaining to me what they wanted on their lottery ticket, and I got like 1 number wrong or something. Now normally this is no big deal. Typically I just send them inside to customer service as they can refund the ticket and print them the correct one. But no, that was not acceptable for this man. He sat there screaming and shouting about how I was trying to rip him off and steal his money, and even started giving me death threats. I was going to refund him right this second, or he was going to ducking break into there and kill me or fight me or whatever bullcrap. I calmly pointed out to him the fact that he is currently being recorded by about 8 different cameras. I have several weapons with me, and there are several customers behind him. Either he goes to customer service and gets his ducking refund like I keep telling him to, or I call the police and he gets dragged away and gets at least a night in jail and probably a misdemeanor for threats of violence. And there would be pretty much no chance of fighting it since we have video evidence that does include audio seemed to finally get through to him, and he angrily stormed off to the store where surprise customer service was able to fix his issue. Story 26. I used to work at a call center for various utility companies, first calling customers with imminent shutoff notices, cash or candles, and then in customer service taking calls. I could write a novel on some of the things I heard, but my absolute favorite was during my first year making cash or candles calls. I called a customer regarding his gas bill. He wasn't there, but his wife answered. For this particular gas company, we were allowed to speak to a spouse if the customer was not present. So I start talking to the wife and start to give her the "your bill is overdue" spiel. As soon as I mentioned the overdue bill, this lady freaking lost it. That son of a bitch, he told me he paid it. She was absolutely bawling into the phone. I tried to explain that it was very possible that he had paid the bill and their number had not yet made it out of our dialer, which happened quite a bit. Bull crap, don't start sticking up for him. More pitiful sobbing. No wonder he was gone 3 ducking hours. Turns out, this man had left earlier to pay the bill. He had come home, left the bill and receipt on the counter, and left again. His wife was convinced he had lied about paying the bill, forged the payment receipt, and was cheating on her. It took me 15 minutes to get this lady rational enough to call the gas company and confirm that the bill had, in fact, been paid. Story 27. I worked at Wendy's as a teen, and one evening I was working drive-thru. Some guy came through and ordered 2 4-for-4s and proceeded to pay in coins. I counted the coins, they were short. Then I counted them again, got the same total, and they were short. He insisted he wasn't short. I went and got the coin counter and counted them with that. I got the same total. He was short. We were about to just give him the food, and then he started screaming and yelling. He parked his car at the drive-thru window and squeezed through the little crack from the door to the wall to come inside. Our lobby was full of young families, dinner rush, and he was actively smoking both a joint and a cigarette in the lobby, next to multiple very young children. We asked him to leave and he wouldn't, Then he assaulted a co-worker of mine who was maybe 100 lbs soaking wet and a relatively frail woman in her 60s. Another guest called the cops, and he proceeded to assault an officer when they arrived. Instead of 2 4-for-4s, he got 2 counts of assault. He also got a DUI for smoking a joint while driving. Could have kept his mouth shut and had 2 4-for-4s for free. Story 28. A guy at work came out of a meeting where he was told to change his design on a project, which was a fairly standard step in the process. He stomped back to his desk, slammed down his notebook, tossed a folder of papers on the floor, sits down, and cranked his music. Normally we were in cubicle farms, but the office was being renovated so we had no walls so everyone could see this, and his music is just blasting in an open area. The manager walks by and tells him to turn his music off. Poopy Pants slammed some more stuff around on his desk, ducked this, and walked out. He came in late the next day still pouting and punching stuff around on his desk. He was like that for 3 days, during which there was another meeting where he was told to grow up. He was 35 years old. Story 29. Security guard here, I've seen many. A more notable one was when a drunk lady was trying to drive her car off of a 2-story parking garage, but she was failing to make one of the turns without scratching the side of her truck. I tried telling her to leave her truck up there and not drive, but she wasn't hearing any of it. She then became convinced that the architecture of the building was designed to trap her in particular, so she began screaming, "Help, I'm trapped!" repeatedly before taking the turn so incorrectly that she tore her wheel well and gas cap clean off her truck. I watched and cringed as they were slowly torn off the truck. The sound it made was wretched. She didn't care. She just kept driving. She then proceeded to hit one of the cars on the lower level. At this point, I had already do ejaculate or cum, semented everything, and called the cops. The cops gave her a DUI while she was screaming the whole time that I had set her up. A few days later, when it was time for her to check out of the hotel, she was staring at me the entire time while checking out. And upon leaving, she said, "See you later, Alan." My name isn't Alan. The front desk guy would ask me to tell this story to people while laughing his ass off for the following year. Story 30. I used to do odd bits of freelance web dev. I once met a client in a public workspace for a handover. It transpired that they were not happy despite all defined deliverables being ticked off on my end. They were clearly just looking to get out of paying or renegotiate the price we agreed. Already paid 25% deposit for me to start work in the engagement contract. When I insisted that I considered the project complete and needed to be paid in full, they had a bit of a crap fit. Pulling their face wouldn't let me get a word in edgeways, volume increasing, telling me that they planned to use the work anyway and I couldn't stop them, etc. All the scare tactics. You'll be hearing from my solicitor. I'm going to sue you. I'll report you for false advertising. Okay, haha. He also name-dropped, if you could call it that, his uncle a few times, like I was supposed to know who he was. I did not. His business was sweeping up little jobs that his uncle's firm was too big to bother with. I can only assume that he did actually speak to a solicitor because not only did I not get sued or even hear from one, but I was paid in full on the last day before the invoice was to be overdue. The funniest bit was that he made a point of phoning me on the day to tell me he waited until the last day on purpose. Bear in mind, he'd done a bank transfer already. There was no other purpose to the call. I was just like, yeah, everyone pays on the last day. That's just trade credit, mate. I gave you net 14 terms. And he seemed really miffed that I didn't care. D, for those wondering, he hadn't been in business long and his venture never really got any traction. Site is no longer up. Thank God I never offered VP's hosting to clients. Story 31. A new temp was fired, so he got his stuff from the break room and walked out of the building punching holes in the walls and ripping down posters and destroying anything he could get his hands on. All of it came out of his paycheck, and my boss and us were laughing that his check came out to something like 30 cents for a full week of work. Story 32. Used to work at a pizza shop. A lady called one day wanting to use 2 hefty coupons that would have made her order basically free. But there are rules that don't allow people to use certain coupons together, so this lady starts trying to throw her weight at me. and telling me she was the executive of an $18 million company, and basically told me I was poor and worthless because I worked at a pizza place. I was a delivery driver and very familiar with the trailer park she lived at. It was a crap hole. Another time, we had an older dude call and ask where the free Parmesan cheese he asked for was because someone forgot to place them with his order. Normally, on free items, we won't send a driver out to deliver them. But first, he asked for them directly, and second, I was going to take them to him because I had another delivery nearby his place. He was super nice the whole time. And then, right as I was about to hang up, he tells me he's going to shoot and kill whoever showed up as retribution for forgetting his free Parmesan cheese. The absolute calm in his voice as he said that sent shivers down my spine. I had my boss blacklist that guy after that. I've got a million more stories for my 7 years as a pizza delivery driver, but those are just the ones that come to mind first. Story 33. Lady comes into the store I work at to buy Ugg boots 3 days before Christmas. Back then, Uggs sold like crazy, so we barely had any left. She was a size 9, which we were completely out of, and the only ones we had left were a size 7 in the style she wanted. Next day, she walks into the store wearing the Uggs with her toes busting out the front on both of them. I contain my laughter, but she immediately starts demanding a refund and saying we sold her defective shoes. I told her I was the one who helped her and I knew these were 2 sizes too small and she knew that when she bought them. So then she starts blaming me. So I just start laughing. I call the manager and explain the situation to her, and she starts laughing too. She gets pretty mad and tells us about how she is going to write a bad review and all this crap. We continue laughing. My manager then takes a picture of her feet and starts cracking up harder. I call over another employee who is curious what we are laughing about. He is a little confused about why we are laughing in a customer's face until he sees her toes busted out the front of her Uggs and starts laughing too. Every time she would threaten us with a bad review, we would start laughing harder. Eventually, she stormed out, but did the funniest little waddle as she left the store, which absolutely broke us. My manager was crying at this point and made the body language like she was going to pee herself, and she waddled away to the back room, which made us laugh even harder. I'm sure to this day that lady won't forget that moment, and neither will we. Story 34. My emotionally immature parents have had several public tantrums. I think people would just see them as mentally ill, and I wonder about it too. My mom and I were in a Marshall's. She basically stepped out of line to look at some bins next to checkout. When she wanted to get back in line, the women maybe told her to go to the back of the line. She then complains loudly about discrimination. We are a minority race. My dad often has road rages, especially triggered by luxury brand vehicles. He will tailgate them while we are in the vehicle. He seems to get a rush and feel extremely satisfied that he has intimidated rich people. At Disneyland, with extended family, my dad decides to pick a fight with a big and tall security guard. My dad is a short man. I seem to remember him poking the guard in his belly. Later on, when my parents were not around, my Sil managed to make light of the matter that it was really funny. She didn't have to grow up with this lunatic as a father. At a restaurant, he somehow got pissed that he had to wait in line and felt slighted. He complained loudly on how he wanted to speak to the manager. I let him know that servers will spit in the food of rude customers. We left the restaurant without eating. Now my parents are using every tactic they can to convince me to move near them. No ducking way. I've only described their public behavior. This doesn't include their even worse behavior in private situations when they threaten to kill us over minor things. Story 35. This happened back when I worked in sports broadcasting. They kind of abruptly fired this one guy who was pretty cool. It wasn't a performance issue on his part. It was just the typical upper management, we want to go in a different direction. They did some reshuffling, and it was basically the same as before they fired dude, but with a different number of people and different names for positions. It was cold-blooded, let's just leave it at that. Anyway, on the day he gets the news, he is livid. So he goes around to almost every department and tries to extract a promise that if he starts another bigger, better thing, those people will jump ship with him. It was sad and funny, because you could see him go office to office. Then, as he would leave one office to the next, people would be miming crazy to each other. He got to me, and I agreed and said, I'm right there if he gets his investors, etc. After he left my cubicle, neighbor says, You aren't quitting for John's crazy idea, are you? I respond, Of course not, but I thought I'd let him win this one. Sure, it's not as dramatic sounding as a public fistfight or a bunch of broken plates, but it went on for 2 hours. Story 36. I have a customer that refuses to use anything more than a flip phone. He had called in an order, and I misheard him or something, and short-ordered him 2 items. Well, when he came to pick up the order, and it was too short, he lost it. I calmed him down, and then he asked, Why did this happen? And when I said, Honestly, I misheard you, and it was an honest mistake, he couldn't accept that and kept asking, Why did this happen? Got to a point where he got into my face, I am not easily animated, and that got him even more mad. He finally just said, Duck this, when I wouldn't back down and left in a hurry. Didn't see or hear from him for 2 years. Next time he came in, he knew I had the answer he needed and was overly nice to me. Story 37. Some dude obsessed with me kept buying me crap unsolicited over the countless times I'd tell him no, but would conveniently forget, as if it wasn't my 50th time declining his advances. At one point, he bought me a $50 gift card in which I tried to give back. He yelled at me in an explanation that he's doing it to get you to like me. I told him I don't need it to get him to like me, and he went crazier. He'd slam his fist on the table and scream some crap like, I buy people things so they like me, it is not transactional, so why won't you take it? I stayed calm throughout all of this as he'd get louder. It was a face flushed in red with eyes swelled up in tears as he'd shake in anger. At this point, I'm thinking this bitch is going to stab me in the face. I ended up changing my mind and keeping the card just so he can shut the hell up and duck out of my face. Over some duckin' $50 gift card. He wanted my validation so bad because his ego saw me as some trophy to win and show off. Then he'd go behind my back and tell people how greedy and manipulative I seemingly am for taking advantage of him, even though I dislike him. Then he'd miserably fail to read me and get everyone in on it. Loser. Story 38. I saw the beginning of this but didn't witness the full-blown meltdown. My immediate family flew to another state for my grandmother's funeral. My husband and I paid for our flights. My parents paid for theirs and my sister's flights. My sister has always been bad with money and my parents have always rescued her. At the time, she was 38 and I was 34. My parents were nice enough to pay for 2 rental cars, one for them and my sister and another for my husband and me. My sister got pissed that she didn't have her own rental car and threw a fit. Her fit escalated, and she went to her hotel room while my dad followed and tried to calm her down. I didn't see this part, but I was told that she had a full-on meltdown and threw herself down on the floor kicking and screaming. She demanded that my parents pay to change her flight so that she could leave 2 days early, immediately after the funeral. The next day, at the funeral, she was absolutely and completely charming to everyone. Only a handful of us knew that less than 24 hours earlier, she was a total psycho. Meanwhile, I was still processing what had happened and how my parents were catering to her insanity while dealing with my grief also. I didn't speak to my sister for 2 years after that. I still keep her at arm's length. She is now on some better meds that stabilize her more, but there is still a ton of resentment in me. Story 39. I live in a small town where all the peaked-in high school jocks now have kids who are old enough to play sports. I recently saw a dude who has his picture on the H's Wall of Fame, 'cause he had 1 good year of wrestling, lose his absolute mind on his 8-year-old son because he struck out in baseball. This 36-year-old dude who's 300 plumblebs and couldn't jog to first base is screaming, I told you to hit the ducking ball, while his son is in tears. It's pretty damn common and it's sad. All these dudes live such sad lives that they need to relive their glory days through their kids, and they have public meltdowns nonstop, like are in tears and sulking because their children aren't playing good enough for them. Story 40. I worked at a local hamburger hot dog place in high school. It was a super popular location in a mall food court. We would have lines wrapped around the entire food court starting from opening at 10:30 for 2-3 hours straight. I was taking orders one day when we'd been into the rush about 45 minutes. I was in the zone, not really noticing the people, just taking orders. All of a sudden, this dude stormed up to the counter and threw his hamburger at me. This is the third time this happened today. I asked for no mayo. How hard is that? Then he backed down a little and said, "She put the order in right," and pointed at me while waving his receipt. The manager came up from the back and apologized, just as sweet and caring as he could be. He said it was his fault, he'd make a new one right away. Every single person in line just stared at this goon. He finally kind of realized what a colossal ass he was being, and got a little sheepish, though he didn't apologize to either anybody. I couldn't help thinking how much fast food does this guy eat to have 3 wrong orders at 11:45 a.m. Story 41. I worked at the airport Avis budget return area in college during the summer. The typical procedure is that we check for damage, check the gas mileage, print a receipt, and then send the customer to the shuttle so they can head to the airport, if they are at budget, which is off-site. For this reason, we usually tell people to return the car early in case there are any issues, because we don't want them missing a flight. Well, this guy and his mom, mid-30s and 60-ish, return their car, and the entire front bumper is ducked up, like barely hanging on. I tell them I need to file a report and get their signature since it was clear they got in an accident. This dude absolutely detonates. He starts screaming. They will miss their flight, and his mom joins in trying to bully me into letting them go. I stood my ground and said, "No can do." The guy screams as loud as he can in the parking lot and does a running kick into their luggage, sending it flying. This is a grown-ass adult, and he's melting down in a car rental parking lot. Eventually, the mom signs the form, and they scream about how they won't be renting from us again before getting on the shuttle and leaving. It was pretty hilarious to see someone explode over a minor inconvenience, especially when it was their fault that the car was ducked up. I saw a lot of crap in that job, but that was by far the craziest thing I witnessed. Story 42. The time I was working at a tire shop by the mall and it was Black Friday. The mall ropes off certain areas to keep the flow of traffic going, and someone moved the posts. My husband was visiting me at work when we saw the cars backing up. We went out to move the posts so people could drive again, and some ducking dude gets out of his car just belligerent that he's been waiting to get out. We try to explain we are helping him do that, and now that he's out of his car screaming, he's the asshole holding up everyone. Dude pulls a goddamn gun, and I think it was the spirit of Black Friday, but I just threw my arms up like we are trying to help you, and you want to shoot us? People are backed up honking at this man-child to get back in his car and go the duck on. We tell him police are on the way if he wants to keep waiting or shoot someone while he waits. Whatever you want, big dog. It's your show. Dude has a moment of clarity and drives off finally. I hope he stays up at night thinking about what a little bitch he was that day for years to come. I hope he doesn't have a gun anymore, but I have my doubts. I have not worked another Black Friday in retail since then. Story 43. Back in 2017-18, I worked at a box office for a large theater that was presenting the first tour of Hamilton. That was during the Hamilton craze. We sold out of season tickets because that was about the only guaranteed way to secure tickets to the show. Subscribers were allowed an opportunity to buy tickets ahead of the public on sale. This show was a hot ticket, and these tickets were expensive. This subscriber had his season tickets for a Saturday evening. He bought a few extra for his son and son's girlfriend. The problem was he bought the extra tickets for the Saturday matinee show while his subscription was for Saturday evening. It is an easy mistake to make. That's why the checkout screen asks you to verify the date and time of the extra tickets you're buying. But he was at the evening show, and now he had 2 expensive tickets that went unused, and the evening show is sold out. He threw a fit, jumping and screaming at the window. There wasn't anything we could do. The show was sold out, and the producers of the show would not permit any refunds, especially for a past performance. I remember he threw his wallet on the ground and stomped on it. Eventually, he gave up and just went in to watch the show. He left the son and girlfriend outside. We felt bad for them, so we gave them free tickets to see a different show we had going on. That dad sucks. Story 44. Saw a woman stealing those packs of 12 croissants in plastic. And then when security didn't let her leave, she doubled down and went insane and started throwing handfuls of croissants. It was ducking epic. Edit. I wish I saw more, but it was leaving a Safeway. And as curious as I am, I try my best not to rubberneck when people are having moments. Lol. Story 45. When I was a chef, I worked 2 and sometimes 3 jobs. Was at job number 3, greasy spoon spot in rural Colorado, and had not slept in 2 days. Fired an order of over-medium eggs. Boss chirps at me to go take care of something. I forget eggs while putting away food while chef owner is standing in the kitchen. I proceed to royally scorch the eggs. No big deal. It's like 0.45 worth of eggs. Psych. This mother ducker grabs the pan, whips it at the wall where the knives are hanging, breaking the pan in half and sending hot oil and knives flying around our tiny-ass kitchen. This man-child proceeds to scream at me for 5 minutes in our wide-open kitchen while I pick up the catastrophe he has just created. Refire eggs, send out the plate, customer is happy. When I quit over text later in the day after going to job 1, he proceeds to call me 26 times in 30 minutes, leaving voicemails ranging from mother ducking asshole, faggot, and I will ducking kill you. Then he texted me 45 times over the next 8 hours threatening my life and telling me to never contact his wife or anyone involved with the business again. Shout out to Shane at the Chimney Brick in Eaton, Colorado. Story 46. When I worked at Starbucks, we would have this person who would come in just for a cup of water. She would walk in immediately raising her voice and cussing in front of customers and their kids. One day, she reached over the bar and grabbed one of my barista's wrists because she was in a bad mood or something IDK. So I told her she needed to leave and wasn't allowed to come back ever again. She stood in the doorway, cussing and screaming at me, and threatened to cut my mother-ducking head off. This was in front of a lobby full of customers, maybe 30 people or so. Fast forward a few weeks and she's back. She makes a scene and starts going off again. A customer decided to stand up for the workers. This was my day off and I wasn't there. She grabbed a coffee from the handoff plane and threw it on the customer. Then she spit on his kids. Meanwhile, she's still yelling and cussing and threatening everyone in the store. One of the baristas sent me the video she took of this happening. I was shocked. I didn't know how to react. Apparently, the customer she assaulted filed a police report on her, so she has a warrant for assault. Story 47. I don't know if this is the biggest I've seen, but it happened within the past 12 months, so it's somewhat fresh in my mind. I had gone to get food at Five Guys one night, and a lady came in with her dog. I don't know if having the dog was an issue since another guy had his dog with him without much of an issue. I'm not entirely sure what kicked off the entire thing, except that it involved the lady's dog. She started screaming and stamping her feet, yelling at the employee and calling her all sorts of names. The R slur was her favorite one to use. She then exclaimed that she lived in a building with bedbugs in it and threatened to spread them to everyone in the store. Eventually, she was escorted out, but hung around the windows outside and started recording on her phone. She was still there when I got my food and left, so I'm sure that more crap happened, but I was long gone by that point. Story 48. Was at Walmart with a guy I used to know one night. The checkout we were using broke, so he started smacking it for not accepting his card. After he whacked it a few times, he was told to leave. As we're walking out, the guy who checks receipts calls him over. Turns out he had opened a Hot Wheel and put it in his pocket. He tried to say he came in with it, that he only had the phone case. I walked out to go smoke so I wouldn't be anywhere near this if the cops showed up. A few minutes later, he walks out all red-faced and said, "Get in the truck, we're leaving." As we walked to the truck, he put his arms back and yelled, looked like something out of a werewolf movie. We got back in the truck, and he just turns on the radio and just immediately switches to nice regular mode as if nothing had ever happened. His latest girlfriend was gone the next day. Story 49. Was on a cruise with my family in Mexico. On cruise ships, bars are everywhere and they often have the same materials. My partner and I were ordering drinks at the outside bar by the pool when an older lady, 50 plus for sure, came up to the bar and wanted special treatment. Basically, she wanted her drink done first because she's deathly allergic to bees, and you, management bartender, need to do something about all these bees. There were not many bees, and no one else was bothered. But she started waving menus around trying to get any otherwise chill bees away from her. But it wasn't working, because bees don't like being agitated like that. I tried to tell her not to wave menus at them, and she did not care to listen. She kept going on and on about how someone else needed to do something about the bees while her drink was being made. The thing is, if she was so deathly allergic, she would have dipped out and gone to the same bar inside, almost anywhere else on the ship. The bartender was visibly annoyed with her, and we left shortly after getting our drinks because it was just too much to listen to a boomer who can't walk 10 more feet to take responsibility for herself. Story 50. When I worked at a cinema, I had a couple roughly in their 60s basically folding their arms and shouting no at me because I couldn't serve them a ticket to a screening of Saving Mr. Banks. It was an advanced screening 4 weeks before the actual release, as a reward for membership card holders. We held these regularly, but usually a week in advance, that sort of thing. Disney even sent their own security to monitor for piracy because of how far off the actual release was. This couple had misread the website, refused to accept that it was a members-only screening, and insisted that I was going to let them buy tickets. I wasn't. There wasn't even an option on the till, because those screenings were programmed to only scan the cards. There was no option to ring up a regular ticket. And besides, I was working a crafty minimum wage job. Being able to be the first person to ever tell these entitled dickheads no was basically part of my wages. They were potentially the rudest people I've ever spoken to, and thankfully, the end result was them leaving in a huff once the manager came out and told them to duck off. Story 51. I was flying Spirit coming back from a work trip, first and last, and some real Spirit Airlines stuff was happening ahead of me in this very long line. I watched 3 consecutive adults scream at this poor lady. One paid extra fees, another 2 stormed off, completely berating this poor woman who has at this point obviously been set up by the company to fail. I got up to the counter and said, "I'm sorry you had to deal with them. I feel like my situation is going to be bad too, but I promise I'll be nice and listen to your directions." She proceeds to check my extra bag through, made sure everything was solid, and sent me on my way saying, "Everything is really bad today. I had 2 spots that were going to the first people to be nice to me today. You got the first one. Dude behind me took the cue and got the second one. By the time we were heading towards TSA, there was more screaming." Story 52. One of the biggest public tantrums I witnessed from an adult happened at an airport a few years ago. A middle-aged man completely lost his temper at the check-in counter. His flight had been overbooked, and despite the airline offering compensation and rebooking options, he wasn't having any of it. He started by raising his voice, demanding to speak to a manager. When the manager arrived and tried to explain the situation, the man began shouting, throwing his arms in the air, and slamming his fists on the counter. His face turned red with rage, and he started hurling insults at the staff, calling them incompetent and accusing them of ruining his plans. Other passengers tried to calm him down, but he turned on them too, yelling for them to mind their own business. Security was eventually called in, and they had to physically escort him away from the counter. Throughout the entire ordeal, he kept shouting and cursing, creating a scene that drew the attention of everyone in the terminal. It was a shocking display of how some people can lose control over relatively minor inconveniences. Story 53. I am a teacher and I used to work in retail, so I've seen some crap. Most recently, though, I was with a friend and we went into a busy pub in Vancouver on a hockey game night. We went to the front and asked if they had room. The girl said there was a wait list and she'd be back. So we waited. Someone else came and asked if we'd been helped. Said we were waiting for the other girl. Then a guy who I'm guessing was a manager came up and told us to go with him. So we did. Even though we said we were waiting for the other girl to come back, he said to go with him. He seats us, and this woman at the next table is irate that we got seated there. This table that was supposed to be for here friends, in a packed pub on a weekend of a sporting event. She was an absolute bitch to us, and the entire time we were there, she was throwing nasty looks and saying crap and complaining to every server that came by that we weren't supposed to be there. Like, seriously, lady? They put us there. Such a tantrum. Story 54. I was waiting to board a flight once, and they were accepting family boarding. This woman and her husband roll up with like 2-3 kids, all under the age of 2, and a huge folded stroller. I'm not sure what the exact issue was, but they told them they had to do something different with the stroller, which caused them to have to delay their boarding. Suddenly, the mom starts yelling her part of the conversation. All I heard was her complaining that this is how loyal white American families are treated. Her words, not mine. And that you'd think they were terrorists. I think the funniest part was not a single person batted an eye over this. Her husband was obviously humiliated, but stayed silent. All of this over common sense airport rules, and a slight inconvenience to them as the airline actually held up the boarding process for them so they could get the situation dealt with and still have priority family boarding. Story 55. It was around Christmas. I was at the airport waiting to fly home to see family. I heard a disturbance coming from the flight check-in counter and turned to see a grown man probably in his 40s beat red in the face and screaming at the employee behind the counter. I walked a bit closer to hear the conversation. I want a new ticket. I don't know when my flight is supposed to leave. Sir, the flight time is printed on your ticket right there. Yeah, but it's in military time. I don't want a ticket in military time. Get me one that has normal time on it. I can't read military time. Another man stepped in to break up the altercation, and Mr. I can't read a clock stormed off. He never ended up getting a new ticket. Story 56. Well, I'm not proud of it, but I threw a tantrum when I went to cancel a gym membership and they charged me for 3 additional months. I lost it on the phone, and they said it was in the contract, so I said, I'll be right down. I didn't think at the time, but that sounds pretty scary. I was met with 7 gym workers, 3 of them the biggest muscle-encrusted dudes I've ever seen, and I looked over the contract. Sure enough, we all signed and agreed to pay for 3 months after cancellation. I totally Karened out and asked for the owner who they would not let me contact. Left saying I'll see them in small claims. Got home, calmed down, and called back to apologize. The shakiness in that woman's voice when I talked to her again made me feel horrible. These are people just doing their jobs. I think about out all the time. Story 57. Mid-80s. I'm 16 and working at a tree nursery. Old man and lady come in, probably in their 70s. Apparently some old tree in their yard has died, and they want us to come remove it for free. 1, we didn't do tree removal. 2, the tree predated the existence of our company, so it wasn't even ours. Even if it was, nobody removes a 100-year-old tree for free because it died, regardless of where it came from. The woman was doing all the talking, and what a miserable old bitch. Eventually, my manager, then the GM, then the owner had to get involved talking to her as I watched in disbelief. This old bitch would not stop, and even worse was her henpecked husband standing silently behind for an hour listening to her bitch. For I'm sure the billionth time in his life, I've never forgotten the look on his face. Whichever one of them died first, I'm sure he was relieved to finally be away from that twat. Story 58. I work in hotels. Dude left behind his charger. Standard charger, nothing special. Called for daies looking for it to be sent to him in Canada. The charger would cost him more to ship from the US to Cannes than the charger was worth. Charger maybe cost $20. It cost him $45 US to send back to him. GM was in charge of sending items back and unfortunately got sick family emergencies, so it wasn't sent back for almost 2 weeks. He called every day for 2 weeks about this charger. He would quite literally scream at my desk agents. And to the point I quit taking his calls. The final day, And the day my GM was finally back in office, dude called literally 33 times during my shift, literally screaming, "I want my charger." My visual was that kid from the movie Better Off Dead, "I want my $2. I get it, is his charger, but he was so out of pocket it didn't make sense. It was literally a cheap Amazon-type charger. Story 59. A customer got mad at another customer for buying the last PS5, even though it was a pre-order. The guy followed the PS5 buyer out to his car, screaming at him and trying to fight him over it. As the buyer was driving away, the guy started throwing rocks at the car. The buyer sped the hell away, nearly running over someone. The crazy mother ducker said he was going to sue the store because we called the cops. Not sure what happened, but I hope he got jail time for assault. Ducking stupid asshole. Story 60. I have seen several, usually drugs or alcohol are involved, but I've seen an anger meltdown from a lady before that was absolutely unreal. Must have been suffering mentally from something, as it was beyond intense. The most entertaining one was a beautiful girl, obviously very rich, throwing a toddler-esque tantrum outside of a club in Sweden. She had tried to walk in. The bouncer wanted her to wait in line. She obviously didn't like that and tried to push her way in before losing it, stamping her feet, screaming, throwing things, hammering her fists on him until another bouncer carried her away. She walked in circles, shouting. It was wild. It was also light outside, so everyone walking along the harbor in Stockholm could see her have her little princess meltdown. Story 61. Truce to work at Publix. Old man walked in, went to the deli, bought a fried chicken meal box, and proceeded to lose it because there wasn't gravy included with the meal. The only time we ever had gravy as a side was Thanksgiving. We explained this. "Well, how am I supposed to eat fried chicken with no gravy, goddammit?" Red in the face, hollering about his gravy, stomping up and down the aisles. Eventually, the store manager got him calmed down and out the door. But it was a solid 30 minutes of what kind of a place ain't got gravy for fried chicken. That's tied with the woman who threw a bottle of wine at my head because the law in my state would not allow me to sell it to her before 8:30 in the morning. God, I hated working there. Story 62. Was walking with my girlfriend at the time through downtown Boston. Those familiar with know that there is a large hotel with an arched plaza looking out onto the harbor, and that typically a large flag of some kind is flying within the space. As we were walking toward this arch, as a beer garden I wanted to swing past was nearby, a woman who was extremely angry at whomever was on the other end of her phone call. Whoever this other person was, they were struggling to find a meeting point. Suddenly, the woman exclaims at the top of her lungs, "Meet me by the giant ducking flag," while storming off, past us, and away from said giant ducking flag. It being a weekend afternoon, downtown was pretty deserted, and the lady was loud enough that she could easily have been heard for at least a block in any direction. We never saw this woman or her missing companion ever show up at the giant flag. Story 63. The most recent one I remember is when I was waiting in line to receive my McDonald's order. The guy in front of me apparently had already received his food, walked out of the building, and walked back in. Once an employee gave him the time of day, he started screaming at them while waving his bag of food in their face. Something along the lines of, "My children need to eat this. Does this look ducking acceptable to you?" He kept repeating that over and over while taking out his burger and showing the employee how squished it was. The manager was called out, and he basically did the same exact thing to the manager. Except the manager offered him a refund after trying to defuse the situation and getting cut off repeatedly. Anyway, I have tons of stories like this, especially when it comes to my own family. But I suppose this was just one of the more recent events involving a stranger, at the very least. Story 64. I remember being in line at Comic-Con and being one of the only few people they let in line because the celeb had only that line to do autographs for. And then a guy came along and was told he had to try again later because the celeb after signing would be going to their photo ops, then their panel, and then they would be back. The guy turned into, I don't know what would be the male equivalent to a Karen. but he was so pissed off because he said he wanted to get the autograph before the photo op, but he was told to come back later. Ultimately, I saw the guy was in line once the celeb did go back, but before he threw the biggest tantrum in the world. Story 65. I worked seasonal at a popular tech store and had someone come in without their store credit card, but they possessed the paperwork that proved they had one on the way in the mail. He was trying to use this piece of paper to buy an Xbox Zone, so I called the manager over to see if anything could be done. This was during the Christmas rush and I had only worked there maybe a week. Manager said no and walked away. This man stood there and continued to try to get me to use the information from his paperwork to purchase the Xbox Zone. When I declined once again, he started shouting at the top of his lungs in a crowded store, "Merry ducking Christmas to me!" He repeated this a couple more times while he was storming out of the store, shouting about how it's bullcrap or whatever, his poor wife or GF trailing behind him. I still tell the story every Christmas. Story 66. We were briefly friends with a couple of newlyweds from work. We used to hold casual card nights in the houses of all the couples involved in rotation, but never had any issues until it was the newlyweds' turn. We are all playing cards. One of the husband and wife teams hits a lucky streak and is winning most hands. Suddenly the groom stands up and leaves the table, walking towards the kitchen where we had all left the snacks we had brought. The winning guy calls out, "Grab me a packet of crisps while you're out there, please." The groom returns with a big packet of crisps, throws them on the ground and jumps on them, then runs to his bedroom and slams the door. We were all sitting there thinking, "What just happened?" His wife says, "Roddy hates to lose. You should all leave now." We never told them again who was hosting the card nights. Story 67. Was waiting to board a flight and they are lining up the pre-board passengers. This older man starts throwing a tantrum when the gate agent starts wheeling another passenger in front of him. "I've just had chemo and I get to go first." The gate agent said, "Sir, all of these people need assistance. I need for you to be an adult and wait your turn." Guy kept pounding his feet and stomping around in the boarding area. Gate agent thankfully didn't give in to his tantrum and went ahead and boarded the person in the wheelchair. Throwing a tantrum over being second instead of first to board just seemed unnecessary. Not sure how he decided he was the sickest person boarding the plane. Story 68. When I worked at Walmart as an overnight stalker back in 2016, we had a woman come in at 2 a.m. and ask me for a very specific brand of crackers. Not only did we not carry them, but when I Googled the brand on my phone, it turns out those crackers hadn't been made since 1970, which was weird considering this seemingly well-put-together woman appeared to be only 30 years old. When I told her that we didn't have them, that no one would, she flipped out on me and told me it was my fault that no one had them. She then demanded to speak to the manager. I brought the shift supervisor over to this fuming mad woman, and he explained the same thing to her. She flipped out even more and shoved several items off of the shelf before stomping out of the store. Story 69. I was managing a fancy bar that got full pretty easily. A girl threw a tantrum because it was full, and there wasn't a table for her. She had no reservation. She was screaming so much that I managed to wiggle a big group onto a smaller table and freed up a space for her just to get her to be quiet. It didn't work, though. She didn't like the space I made and said she wanted our VIP table, already booked that night, and it cost $2,300 to reserve it. I said no. She said if she couldn't have it, she'd lie on the floor and scream. I said she couldn't have it. So she lay down on the floor and screamed while I and all the bar clients watched her. Some people are genuinely insane, and I don't understand their vision of life. Story 70. My psychotic ass, now disowned sister tried to kill me and our other sister when she was 23, and we were 9 and 11. Her ex didn't want to date her again, so she shoved us in the car and screamed, "Let's ducking wreck tonight, girls," and Dad slung out the driveway. We started screaming and crying. Somehow the ex managed to get in front of the car and make her stop. He took the keys out, snatched her out, beat her ass in his front yard, then called our parents to come get me and my other sister. Burn in hell, Amy. Story 71. I worked for a private practice. All the entitled patients when they didn't get what they wanted. Thank God we had the emergency button where once pressed, security comes barging in to escort the patient out, and they get banned from coming back into the office. I think it was pressed once while I worked there for 4.5 years. Story 72. In retail, a customer threw a tantrum because I didn't know the exact weight of a TV we sold. We couldn't find it on the box, and she wanted us to take it out of the box and put it on some magic scale that we didn't have. When I couldn't give her an answer, she started screaming, "Will someone help me?" and throwing her arms in the air. The manager heard her and approached her to ask if everything is okay because she was causing a scene. She told the manager, "Duck you," took off her glasses, and threw them full force into the manager's face. The police were called because she refused to leave, and this lady had the nerve to ask the police, "Can I still buy the TV?" Story 73. Not necessarily the worst, but the most douchebag. I was in Vegas for a job interview, checking into one of the old hotels downtown, $50 a night, the Plaza. Old, but clean enough, and again, I was just there for an interview. The dude in front of me is chastising the poor young lady at the check-in counter and literally claps while saying, "This is Vegas, chop chop." I'm just like, dude, this is 50-year-old crap, downtown Vegas for 50 freaking bucks a night. You want chop chop, go pay for it, you fool. I laughed about it with the poor lady, and she upgraded my room. Meanwhile, I hope they put that bastard right by the pool. Story 74. My wife and I overslept the morning of our flight back home. We were at a hotel just minutes from the airport and thought we could still make the flight if we hurried. When we arrived at the gate, the agent said the doors had already closed and our seats had been assigned to standby passengers, but they could put us in a later flight. My wife shouted at the agent, demanding that she put us on that flight right now. I tried to explain to her that we were late and the standby policy was the reason they were able to just give us another flight. But the demands continued. It wasn't a super dramatic meltdown, but I was very embarrassed. She is now my ex-wife, thank God. Story 75. Got in a minor accident in a coffeehouse parking lot. The guy got out threw a broken piece of his car at my car, got in my face, and started screaming that I better ducking have insurance. My kids hid in the back seat. I called my husband to come help deal with the guy. Insurance companies found him 100% at fault. Then he starts calling our house saying if we don't pay the deductible, he will get it from us another way. Called the cops. Guy screamed at them. We live in a small town and his wife heard the story, thinking this wasn't a first offense for him because she divorced him a year or so later. Story 76. I worked at a grocery store during the pandemic, so I saw too many grown adults screaming at minimum wage workers. Because there was a shortage of whatever food they wanted, we only allowed 1 case of toilet paper per customer or for enforcing the company mask policy. Outside of people losing their minds during COVID, one time I was stocking yogurt and one of the containers fell to the ground and exploded open. There was a man standing nearby and the tiniest amount got on his shoe. I apologized profusely, but he lost his mind screaming that I had ruined his shoes and was a worthless, incompetent person who wouldn't amount to anything since I couldn't even put yogurt away correctly. Story 77. Oh boy, let me tell you. I once saw a grown man throw a full-on tantrum at the grocery store because they ran out of his favorite cereal. He was flailing his arms, yelling about the injustice of the cereal industry, and demanding to speak to the manager like it was a life-or-death situation. I half expected him to drop to the floor and start kicking his legs. People were just standing there, wide-eyed, clutching their shopping carts like they were life preservers. It was both hilarious and a little terrifying, like a scene straight out of a sitcom. Story 78. I've seen plenty of grown men get abusive with me as a public librarian over their books on hold, or not having a certain DVD. My favorite is when they want me to make someone move out of a chair they want, or someone taking too long to read a newspaper. I wish we had a jar of quarters to throw at them and tell them to get out and buy their own goddamn. The day I quit was the best day of my life. Story 79. Probably the random old guy who started crap talking and berating the pharmacy staff at my local Walgreens because his meds weren't ready yet, and they were very swamped. I apologized on behalf of that crafty human to the guy working the counter who had to deal with that BS. And he said that specific old dude has been doing that constantly at multiple places, not just that pharmacy. Counter guy worked at other places where the old dude has literally been banned for his behavior. Imagine being so uncivil you're banned from basic everyday stores pharmacies. Absolutely ridiculous. Story 80. Early 2000, I was working at Costco. A radio host who hated Costco came in with a friend. Of course, since he wasn't a member, he couldn't buy anything. So he made a huge scene, screaming all sorts of things. He was so loud that the employees in the bakery heard him. Fortunately, a cop was there shopping, and him and one of the supervisors escorted him out. The cashier, one of the nicest person in the world, had to take a break. He was shaking from the stress. The asshole is dead now. May he rot in hell. He ruined a lot of people's lives over the years. Story 81. I was getting a ride home after a small backyard BBQ with a girl I went to school with, and her boyfriend. She wanted to go out with us later on that day to the bar, but he said they didn't have a babysitter or the funds to go out. She threw a fit. She was crying, whining, stomping her feet, kicking the seat, pouting, and asking why. We were in our early 20s. She had a 5-year-old. My mouth was on the floor at how completely ridiculous she was acting. I was never able to view her the same. Story 82. This happened in the mid-90s and was semi-public, in a hotel suite with the door opened, and my father standing just outside the room. We were there for the weekend celebrating my college graduation. My tantrum-prone father, mad because we weren't already ready, started screaming, "This is my day, and you're ruining it for me," acting quite like a child in need of a timeout. My mom took it upon herself to start in on him. That's when I told them both to just shut the hell up. Worst part was, that wasn't the only tantrum he threw that day, just the most vivid. Story 83. An ex of mine once had a massive toddler-style tantrum on the floor on a Tesco because I bought white pepper rather than black. She was throwing stuff, shouting, crying, and ended up on the floor like a beetle with her arms and legs in the air shouting about ducking pepper. An ex for many reasons, this being one of them. Story 84. Some woman in the food court yelling at the cashier that her soup was too cold. When the cashier told her to wait, because she was taking another customer's order, the angry lady grabbed her cup and splashed the cold soup on the cashier. She called security, and the angry customer was ushered out of the mall screaming like a preschooler all the way. Story 85. Some dude lost his crap at me because he kept buying stupid cheap-ass phone chargers, and we eventually stopped letting him return them. He started screaming at me that he was going to call the cops on me and kept threatening me. I was the only one working at the gift shop and the hotel security guard. We were a third-party shop in the lobby. Was just standing there laughing at him. I probably should have laughed too, but I was genuinely terrified that he was going to either attack me or get me in trouble with my hard ass of a manager. Story 86. I used to work at a GameStop. We had told a guy we couldn't buy his games as he didn't have an ID. A bit of a silly rule as we'd give them like 10 cents for 100 games. The guy stomped out. About 15 minutes later, we see him come back in and literally throw a jar of mayonnaise at us. He must have loosened the lid because when the jar hit the wall behind us, we were treated to an explosion of mayo on goddamn everything. Story 87. I was in line to drop off a prescription, and some woman cuts the line and tells the pharmacist she's in a hurry, while the pharmacist was talking to an elderly lady. When the pharmacist told her politely to wait at the back of the line, she went on about how she has a child and her husband waiting for her and she's in a hurry. Then she storms out, still complaining, and nearly knocks into me on the way out. I can't believe I've witnessed main character syndrome, Arl. Story 88. I once worked at a third-party mail shipment location. To sum it up, since you're not the post office or a hub of the major shipping places, there's a lot of rules for you to follow, and a lot of stuff you can't send for people. The amount of people I've had throw a tantrum at me because I, a teenager, was not allowed by law to ship their alcohol. Guns and grandma's ashes was too many. Not to mention the people who wanted to ship prescription medication overseas. That was a headache to explain. Story 89. Nothing too crazy, but probably the time my lady held up a line at Walgreens for about 15 minutes because they required anyone buying alcohol or tobacco to show ID. At the time, they even had a sign that basically said, "No ID, no sale, no exceptions." Then she showed her ID. The cashier rang up her beer and I was finally able to pay for my ibuprofen. Seriously? What is it with people and not wanting to show ID for a purchase? Story 90. My sister. She was 22 years old, I was 16. We were at Target with my mom getting school supplies with money from my first paycheck, and she, sis, asked me to buy her a lipstick. When my mom told her it was my money, I didn't have to use it on anyone else, and that she had her own money, she could buy it herself. My sister laid down on the ground and started yelling and screaming and fake crying that it was unfair. Story 91. I saw a clearly mentally disabled man crying very loud on a bench with his helper, family member maybe, trying to calm him down. I felt very bad for him. Whatever caused him to cry like that must have been very disturbing. I imagine it's a very tough and somewhat underappreciated job. But if you help mentally unwell people, I want you to know that I appreciate you. They need your help, and I hope you and your patients luck. Story 92. My ex once threw a tantrum as a 20-something-year-old man about renting an Ernest movie from Blockbuster. We only had enough money and time for one movie, and he wouldn't budge on getting Ernest scared straight or whatever, and I really wanted a scary movie for Halloween. He sat down in the middle of the aisle and yelled and cried about how he just wanted Ernest. I think I ended up walking out empty-handed, leaving him on the floor. Story 93. I live in Belarus. We have quite a few multi-story buildings. Once, when the elevator was not working, I took the stairs. I live on the 10th floor. When I got up, I saw how an adult, pumped-up man was yelling at his wife because she had not prepared fried potatoes for his arrival. This was almost 3 years ago, and I still remember LOL. Story 94. Do the tantrums they throw in the car count? Because I have seen grown adults 35-plus years old go absolutely ballistic because someone cut them off, passed them on the right, not driving fast enough in front of them, etc. I don't duck with people on the road anymore. Do whatever the hell you want. Just get away from me as fast as possible. Story 95. A girl threw a tantrum. She wanted to get, I think, candy. Her mom apparently wanted to show her how stupid her behavior was and threw herself on the floor next to her daughter and started to cry. 4 grown-ups, we were queuing, stood motionless and speechless for at least 4 minutes and watched it in awe. Story 96. Grad school. This guy trying to enter the English program was told he needed to pass a test in a second language or finish 202 foreign language class. He screams for a while and says he'll look into if this is so. I look into it, and it is 100% true. I tell him during next class 2 days later. He has an even bigger freakout. Story 97. After reading these comments, 1 to G is clear. More businesses need to take a firmer stance on abusive customers, kick them out, ban them from returning. Too many businesses are afraid of losing a single sale that they push their staff to deal with childish, inane behavior. You don't want those customers. They scare away the ones you actually do want. Have a backbone. Thank you all for watching. Watch even more great stories on my channel.